Sometimes, the smallest decision is not whether to keep driving, but whether to stop. The rain had been falling over Seattle since early afternoon, soft enough to blur the skyline into shades of silver, steady enough to make everyone hurry towards somewhere warmer. Wind nudged forgotten newspapers across the sidewalk, city buses sighed at every stop, and headlights stretched into shimmering ribbons on the wet pavement. Ethan Parker barely noticed any of it. At 42, he had built one of the largest logistics companies on the West Coast, a business that moved millions of dollars in freight every single day with remarkable precision. Yet nothing in his own life seemed capable of filling the quiet that waited behind the front door of his house every evening. His luxury SUV glided through downtown traffic, insulated from the cold by heated leather seats and perfect silence. His assistant had called twice about tomorrow's board meeting. His chief financial officer had texted updated numbers. None of it felt urgent anymore. Then, as he approached an ordinary neighborhood bus stop, something pulled at the edge of his attention. A little girl sat completely alone beneath the faded blue shelter. She couldn't have been older than 7. She wore a pale yellow raincoat that looked one season too small, white sneakers darkened by puddles, and a tiny blue backpack resting carefully against her knees. She wasn't crying. She wasn't waving at passing cars. She wasn't asking strangers for help. She simply watched every vehicle that slowed at the intersection, her hopeful eyes lifting for a second before quietly falling again. Ethan eased past the stop, his hands steady on the steering wheel, but the image refused to leave him. In the rearview mirror, she became smaller and smaller until she was almost swallowed by the rain. He told himself someone would come. A parent. A relative. A neighbor. Someone always came. Didn't they? The traffic light ahead turned green, inviting him forward, yet his foot hesitated over the accelerator. Something about the way she sat perfectly still unsettled him more than tears ever could. It wasn't fear he saw. It was determination. As though leaving that bench would break a promise too important for a child to abandon. He drove another 100 yards before exhaling slowly and pulling into an empty parking space along the curb. The windshield wipers swept back and forth in steady rhythm while he continued staring through the rain-speckled glass. Meetings could be rescheduled. Contracts could wait another hour. But whatever story was unfolding at that lonely bus stop felt strangely impossible to ignore. He stepped out into the chilly afternoon, the damp air immediately soaking the shoulders of his charcoal coat. Before crossing the street, he stopped inside a nearby coffee shop and ordered 2 hot chocolates. The young cashier smiled politely, assuming one was for his daughter. Ethan almost corrected her, then realized he couldn't explain why he was buying the second cup for a little girl whose name he didn't even know. A minute later, carrying both warm cups carefully through the drizzle, he walked toward the bus shelter. She noticed him approaching but didn't flinch or move away. Instead, she tightened one small hand around the strap of her backpack and glanced once more toward the road, as though still expecting someone else. Ethan placed one cup gently on the bench beside her before taking a seat several feet away, careful not to crowd her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the rain filled the silence. Finally, in a calm voice that carried no pressure, he asked, "Have you been waiting here long?" The little girl kept her eyes on the road and answered so softly that the rain almost carried the words away. "I'm waiting for my mom." The little girl wrapped both hands around the warm cup but did not drink from it right away. She seemed more interested in feeling the heat than tasting the chocolate. Tiny wisps of steam drifted upward between them while buses continued arriving and leaving, each one slowing just long enough to raise a flicker of hope in her blue eyes before disappearing into the rainy afternoon. Ethan watched the pattern repeat again and again. Every engine that approached made her sit a little straighter. Every set of opening doors ended with the same quiet disappointment. Still, she never complained. She never sighed. She simply waited. After another minute, she finally whispered, "Thank you for the hot chocolate." Her voice was gentle, almost careful, as though she did not want to take up too much space in the world. Ethan smiled softly. "You are welcome." She looked down at the paper cup for a moment before asking, "Does it stay warm for a long time?" The question caught him by surprise. "Long enough to help on a rainy day," he answered. She nodded with quiet satisfaction and held the cup a little closer against her jacket. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt patient. Cars splashed through puddles while a city bus pulled away, leaving only the sound of rain tapping against the shelter roof. Ethan noticed the little blue backpack resting neatly beside her. It looked old but carefully cared for, every zipper closed, every strap folded into place. Resting on top of it was a bus ticket, softened by moisture around the edges but protected beneath one small hand whenever the wind grew stronger. "Have you been here since school ended?" he asked gently. She thought for a second before answering. "Since this morning." Ethan glanced toward the gray sky. It was already growing darker even though evening had not arrived. "That is a very long time." She nodded. "Mom told me to stay right here. She said if I stayed here, she would always know where to find me." Ethan felt something tighten quietly inside his chest. There was complete trust in the way she said those words. No anger. No fear. Only certainty. Children believed promises in a way adults often forgot how to. "What is your name?" he asked. She looked at him for the first time with a small, polite smile that carried remarkable courage. "Emma Brooks." "I am Ethan." She repeated his name once, as though placing it carefully into memory, then returned her attention to the road. Another city bus approached. Again she leaned forward ever so slightly. Again unfamiliar faces stepped off before the driver closed the doors and continued down the street. The hopeful expression faded only for a heartbeat before she quietly reset herself for the next bus. Ethan realized she had performed this same ritual countless times that day. He wondered how many strangers had passed without noticing her, or perhaps noticed and assumed someone else would stop. The thought lingered heavily in his mind. His phone vibrated inside his coat pocket. The screen displayed another reminder about the board meeting scheduled in less than an hour. He stared at it for several seconds before pressing the silent button and slipping the phone back into his pocket without reading the rest of the message. For the first time in years, quarterly reports and conference rooms seemed infinitely less important than the little girl sitting beside him, faithfully guarding a promise at an ordinary bus stop while the rain continued falling over a city that had almost forgotten she was there. Emma lifted the paper cup to her lips for the first time, taking a careful sip before placing it back on the bench as though she wanted it to last forever. The warmth brought a faint touch of color back to her cheeks, but her eyes never wandered far from the road. Every passing bus still held the possibility that the next pair of footsteps would belong to her mother. Ethan quietly studied the little girl beside him, trying to understand how someone so young could carry so much patience without complaint. The rain softened into a gentle mist, leaving tiny drops clinging to the glass walls of the shelter. Across the street, shop lights flickered on one by one as the afternoon slowly surrendered to evening. People hurried home carrying grocery bags, umbrellas, and conversations about ordinary things. Time continued moving for everyone except the little girl sitting on the weathered bench. Ethan glanced toward the digital display mounted above the stop. The route schedule had changed 3 times since he first arrived. Emma noticed him looking and spoke almost in a whisper. "She always tells me not to worry if she is late." Ethan nodded gently. "Your mother sounds like someone who loves you very much." Emma smiled with complete confidence. "She does." There was no hesitation in her answer. No uncertainty. Just simple faith. Ethan found himself smiling back before asking, "Did she tell you where she was going today?" Emma carefully reached into the pocket of her raincoat and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. It was creased from being opened many times but protected from the rain inside a small plastic sandwich bag. She held it with both hands before passing it to him. She said if I got scared, I could read this again. Ethan unfolded the note with great care. The handwriting was steady and graceful. It read, "My sweet Emma, wait for me at our bus stop. No matter how long it takes, I will always come back for you. I love you more than every star in the sky. Love, Mom." Ethan felt the words settle heavily in his heart. The message was simple, yet every line carried hope. He handed the note back without saying anything for a moment. Emma folded it exactly along the same creases and slipped it safely into her pocket again. "I read it every hour," she said softly. "It helps me remember." Ethan looked toward the empty street once more. Something about the situation no longer felt like an ordinary delay. Hours had passed. The weather had grown colder. Yet no one had arrived looking for a little girl waiting alone. "Emma," he said gently, "would it be all right if we tried to call your mother together?" She lowered her eyes for the first time since they had met. "She does not have her phone anymore. Do you know another number we could call?" Emma slowly shook her head. She wrote one down. She opened her backpack with careful hands and searched through its contents until she found a small notebook decorated with faded blue flowers. Tucked inside was a folded receipt with a phone number written across the back in dark blue ink. She offered it to Ethan with complete trust. "Mom said if something unexpected happened, a kind person would help me." Ethan stared at the handwritten number for several quiet seconds. It was the first real clue they had. Looking at Emma, then at the rain still falling beyond the shelter, he understood that waiting alone was no longer enough. Whatever had delayed her mother had become a story that needed to be found, and he silently promised himself that before another bus arrived, he would begin searching for the truth. The number rang 3 times before a calm female voice answered. "Harbor Community Health Center. How may I help you?" Ethan stepped a little farther from the bus shelter, lowering his voice while keeping Emma within sight. He explained that he was sitting with a young girl named Emma Brooks who had been waiting alone at a bus stop since morning, and that the only contact information she had was the number written on the back of a receipt. A brief silence followed. Then the receptionist asked gently, "Is she wearing a yellow raincoat and carrying a blue backpack?" Ethan looked toward the bench where Emma sat quietly cradling her cup of hot chocolate. "Yes," he replied. Another pause settled over the line, heavier this time. "Please do not let her leave," the woman said softly. "Her mother was here earlier today." Ethan's heart skipped. "Is she all right?" The receptionist hesitated before answering with careful professionalism. "I cannot discuss medical details over the phone, but I can tell you that her mother was brought to a nearby hospital after experiencing a sudden medical emergency. Before the ambulance left, she kept repeating one thing. She said, 'My daughter is waiting at the bus stop. Please do not let her think I forgot her.'" Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment as the words settled into place. Everything suddenly made sense. Emma had not been abandoned. She had been keeping a promise because her mother had trusted that she would. He thanked the receptionist, who also provided the name of the hospital where Emma's mother had been transferred. As he ended the call, he remained still for several seconds, listening to the rain tapping softly against parked cars. Across the street, Emma continued watching each passing bus with the same unwavering hope she had carried all day. Ethan walked back beneath the shelter and sat beside her again. She looked up immediately, searching his face for an answer. "Did someone know my mom?" she asked quietly. Ethan nodded with a reassuring smile. "Yes. They did." Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "Is she looking for me?" He chose every word carefully. "Your mom wanted people to know exactly where you were because she knew you would keep your promise." Emma lowered her eyes and gently touched the folded note inside her raincoat pocket. "I told you she always comes back," she whispered, almost as if she were reminding herself. Ethan's voice remained warm and steady. "I think your mother would want us to go see her now." Emma looked toward the familiar bench, then back at the road. If I leave, how will she find me? Ethan glanced at the weathered wooden seat where she had spent the entire day. An idea quietly formed. He removed one of his business cards from his wallet and wrote a short message on the back with the pen from his coat pocket. He carefully tucked it beneath the edge of the bench where it would stay dry. The note read, "Emma is safe. We have gone to Harbor Memorial Hospital. Please ask for Ethan Parker." He showed it to Emma before placing it securely in view. She studied the message, then nodded slowly. It was the first time she had agreed to stand. She slipped on her backpack, picked up the now empty cup, and took one last look at the bus stop that had become her whole world for a single rainy day. As they began walking toward Ethan's vehicle, she reached into her pocket, held her mother's folded note close to her heart, and whispered with quiet certainty, "She will know where to find me." The drive to Harbor Memorial Hospital was quiet except for the steady rhythm of rain against the windshield. Emma sat in the back seat with her blue backpack resting carefully on her lap, one hand wrapped around the folded note from her mother and the other tracing the edge of the bus ticket she had protected all day. She never complained about the long wait she had endured. Instead, she watched the city lights pass by through the rain-speckled window, as though each one carried a small piece of hope. Ethan glanced at her through the rearview mirror more than once, surprised by how composed she remained. Most children would have asked endless questions. Emma asked only one. Will she know I kept my promise? Ethan met her eyes in the mirror and answered without hesitation. She already knows. When they reached the hospital, the bright lobby felt warm compared to the cold afternoon they had left behind. A volunteer greeted them with a gentle smile before recognizing Emma almost immediately. "You must be Emma," she said softly. "We have been hoping someone would bring you here." Emma looked up at Ethan before quietly taking his hand. It happened so naturally that neither of them seemed to notice until they were already walking side by side toward the elevators. On the third floor, a nurse welcomed them into a small family consultation room decorated with children's drawings and soft blue walls. She knelt beside Emma and spoke with reassuring kindness. "Your mom is resting right now. The doctors are taking very good care of her." Emma nodded, holding her mother's letter close against her jacket. The nurse then turned to Ethan. "Before she became ill, she kept reaching for her purse. She wanted us to save something for her daughter." From a clear plastic belongings bag, the nurse carefully removed a small envelope with Emma's name written across the front in familiar handwriting. Emma accepted it with trembling fingers and slowly opened the flap. Inside was a birthday card covered with tiny hand-drawn stars. Tucked behind it was a simple silver charm shaped like a tiny bus. Ethan watched as Emma read the message silently before looking up with tears shining gently in her eyes, not from despair but from love. She handed the card to Ethan without saying a word. It read, "Happy birthday, my beautiful Emma. I am sorry today did not go the way we planned. If you are reading this, something unexpected happened, but never believe for 1 second that I stopped coming back to you. Every step I take is always toward you. Keep believing in kindness because one day a stranger may become the answer to your hardest prayer. I love you forever. Mom." Ethan felt his throat tighten. His eyes drifted toward the tiny silver bus charm resting in Emma's palm. Suddenly the old bus ticket, the promise to wait, and the lonely bench all carried a meaning far greater than coincidence. Her mother had built their entire life around promises kept, not promises broken. Emma gently closed the card and whispered, she remembered. "My birthday." Ethan knelt beside her until they were eye level. She remembered everything. At that moment, the attending physician entered the room with a calm expression and reassuring eyes. He explained that Emma's mother was receiving treatment and would need time to recover, but she was stable enough that they hoped she could see her daughter the following day. Relief spread quietly across Emma's face. She clutched the silver bus charm against her heart, smiled through glistening eyes, and for the first time since Ethan had seen her at the bus stop, she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow was still waiting for them. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight that filtered through the hospital windows, replacing the gray rain with a quiet sense of possibility. Emma woke in the pediatric family lounge after spending the night under a soft blanket provided by one of the nurses. Her blue backpack rested neatly beside her chair, and the tiny silver bus charm remained safely closed inside her hand. When Ethan arrived carrying 2 fresh blueberry muffins and a carton of warm milk, she smiled before he even spoke. It was a small smile, but it carried more hope than it had the day before. "Good morning," he said gently. "Good morning," Emma answered. "Do you think today is the day?" Ethan nodded. "I believe it is." They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, watching the morning sunlight slowly brighten the hallway outside. It felt surprisingly natural, as though they had shared many quiet mornings before this one. Later, a nurse invited them upstairs. Before entering the room, Emma stopped at the doorway and carefully straightened the birthday card inside her raincoat pocket. She wanted everything to be just right. Ethan remained a respectful distance behind her as she walked inside. Her mother rested peacefully against white pillows, looking tired but calm. When she opened her eyes and saw Emma standing there, relief spread across her face before any words were spoken. Emma hurried forward and gently wrapped both arms around her mother. Neither of them said much at first. Sometimes love filled a room more completely than conversation ever could. After a few moments, her mother looked toward Ethan. "You stayed with her," she said quietly. Ethan offered a humble smile. "She kept her promise. I only helped her find the rest of the way." Tears shimmered in the woman's eyes. "I did not know if anyone would stop." Ethan glanced toward Emma, who was now showing her mother the silver bus charm. "She gave me every reason to stop." During the following days, Ethan found himself returning to the hospital after every meeting, often arriving with books from a nearby bookstore, fresh fruit, or simple board games that made the afternoons pass more quickly. Emma always insisted they play one round before visiting her mother. She discovered that Ethan had never learned how to play checkers properly, and she laughed every time he lost another game. The sound surprised him. It had been years since genuine laughter had echoed anywhere near his daily routine. Even the hospital staff began greeting him by name. His carefully scheduled evenings gradually disappeared, replaced by shared dinners in the hospital cafeteria where Emma proudly divided every cookie exactly in half because, as she explained, food tastes better when nobody eats alone. Ethan realized she believed that completely. One evening, as they walked through the hospital garden, Emma pointed toward a wooden bench beneath a maple tree. "It looks like my bus stop," she said. Ethan looked at the empty bench and smiled. "It does." She climbed onto it for a moment before looking up at him. "I used to think waiting was the hardest part." "And now?" he asked. She held the tiny silver bus charm between her fingers until it caught the golden light of the setting sun. "Now I think waiting is easier when somebody waits with you." Ethan felt those simple words settle deep inside him. For years he had measured success in miles traveled, companies built, and meetings completed. Yet somehow, the most meaningful journey of his life had begun the moment he chose to sit beside a little girl at an ordinary bus stop and simply wait. By the end of the week, Harbor Memorial Hospital no longer felt unfamiliar. Emma knew which hallway received the morning sunlight first, which volunteer always carried extra coloring books, and which vending machine occasionally gave 2 granola bars instead of 1. Ethan found himself learning those small details too, details he never would have noticed in the fast-moving life he once believed was so important. His assistant quietly rearranged meetings without complaint, and for the first time in years, Ethan stopped measuring every hour by productivity. Instead, he measured his days by whether Emma smiled. Her mother grew stronger with each passing morning, though recovery would require patience. One afternoon, as soft autumn light filled the hospital room, she asked if she could speak with Ethan alone for a few minutes while Emma joined an art activity down the hall. Ethan stepped inside, gently closing the door behind him. She looked toward the window before speaking. "Emma told me everything," she said. "About the hot chocolate. About the note you left at the bus stop. About how you stayed." Ethan lowered his eyes modestly. Anyone would have done the same. She smiled faintly. "I wish that were true." A quiet silence settled between them before she reached toward the bedside table and picked up a small photograph in a simple wooden frame. It showed a younger Emma laughing beside the same neighborhood bus stop on a bright spring afternoon. "That stop became our little tradition," she explained. "Every Friday after school, we would ride the bus downtown, share one muffin from the bakery on Pine Street, and talk about our dreams before coming home." Emma always believed that if two people promised to meet at the same place, love would always find its way back. Ethan studied the picture carefully. The weathered bench, the blue shelter, even the cracked sidewalk looked strangely beautiful now. "She never stopped believing that," he said quietly. Her mother nodded. "Neither did I." She looked directly at Ethan, gratitude filling her tired but peaceful eyes. "You protected more than my daughter that day. You protected her faith in people." Those words lingered with Ethan long after the conversation ended. Later that afternoon, he found Emma sitting at a small table covered with crayons, carefully drawing a picture. She looked up with excitement as he approached. "Do not peek yet," she said with a playful grin. He laughed softly and pretended to cover his eyes. A few minutes later, she slid the drawing across the table. It showed a rainy bus stop, a little girl in a yellow raincoat, a tall man holding 2 cups of hot chocolate, and above them a bright rainbow stretching across the sky even though rain was still falling. At the bottom she had written in careful block letters, "Kind people always stop." Ethan felt emotion rise quietly inside him. "This is beautiful," he said honestly. Emma pointed toward the man in the drawing. "That is you." Then she pointed toward the rainbow. "Mom says hope does not wait for the rain to end. Hope grows while it is still raining." Ethan looked at the picture for a long moment before folding it carefully and placing it inside the inner pocket of his suit jacket, beside contracts that suddenly seemed far less valuable. As evening settled over the city once again, he realized something extraordinary had happened without either of them noticing. He had arrived at the bus stop believing he was rescuing a lonely little girl, but somewhere between a paper cup of hot chocolate, a handwritten promise, and a child's unwavering trust, the lonely person being rescued had quietly become him. 3 months passed, and winter quietly gave way to the first gentle signs of spring. The trees outside Harbor Memorial Hospital began wearing fresh green leaves, and sunlight lingered a little longer each evening. Emma's mother had recovered enough to return to the small apartment they called home, though she still attended weekly therapy appointments and tired more easily than before. Ethan continued visiting every Friday, never because anyone expected him to, but because somewhere along the way those visits had become the favorite part of his week. One bright Saturday morning, Emma tugged gently on his sleeve after breakfast and asked, "Can we go back?" Ethan smiled. "Back where?" She looked at him as though the answer should have been obvious. "The bus stop." Less than an hour later, the three of them stood beneath the familiar blue shelter, where everything had begun. The weathered wooden bench was still there, and tucked carefully beneath one corner, protected from rain all those months earlier, Ethan's handwritten business card remained exactly where he had left it. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still readable. Emma carefully lifted it free and smiled. "You really thought Mom would come looking for me?" Ethan nodded. "I knew she would." Her mother looked at the small card for several quiet seconds before folding it gently into her purse. "I think I will keep this forever," she whispered. Emma walked over to the bench and sat exactly where she had waited that rainy day. She looked around the neighborhood with completely different eyes now. Children laughed in a nearby playground. A city bus arrived, passengers stepped off smiling, and life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different because she was no longer waiting alone. Ethan sat beside her while her mother remained standing nearby, watching them both with grateful eyes. "Do you know what I was thinking that day?" Emma asked. Ethan shook his head. "I kept counting buses," she replied. "I thought maybe if I counted enough of them, one would bring Mom back faster." Ethan looked toward the road where another bus rolled quietly through the intersection. "And today?" Emma rested the tiny silver bus charm in the palm of her hand. Sunlight caught the little charm, making it sparkle. "Today I do not have to count anymore." Her mother joined them on the bench, and together they shared blueberry muffins from the same bakery on Pine Street that had once been part of their weekly tradition. Emma carefully divided each muffin into equal pieces, insisting everyone receive exactly the same amount. Ethan laughed as she inspected each piece with complete seriousness before handing one to him. "Fair is important," she declared. "It is," Ethan agreed warmly. Before leaving, Emma reached into her backpack and removed the drawing she had made at the hospital. It had been placed inside a clear plastic folder to keep it safe. She unfolded it and pointed to the rainbow above the rainy bus stop. "I think it needs one more person now," she said. Taking a blue crayon from her backpack, she carefully drew her mother standing beside Ethan and herself beneath the bright arc of color. Then she wrote one new sentence across the bottom of the page in careful handwriting. "Home is wherever someone chooses to stay." Ethan looked at the finished picture, then toward the quiet bus stop where a single decision had changed 3 lives forever. He realized that buildings could be purchased, companies could be built, and fortunes could grow beyond imagination, but a true home was never something a person owned. It was something created one act of kindness, one promise kept, and one shared moment at a time. 1 year later, the city looked different, although perhaps it was Ethan who had changed. The same buses still rolled through the same streets every morning. The same coffee shop stood on the corner, filling the air with the familiar scent of fresh pastries and warm chocolate. The same blue bus shelter waited beside the sidewalk as quietly as it always had. Yet what had once been an ordinary stop along a busy route had become a place where 3 lives had forever turned toward hope. Every year on Emma's birthday, they returned together carrying blueberry muffins, just as her mother had promised long ago. It had become a tradition that belonged to all of them now. Emma was taller than before, her yellow raincoat replaced by a bright blue jacket that matched the little backpack she still refused to throw away. The silver bus charm remained attached to its zipper, polished from the countless times she reached for it whenever she needed courage. Ethan smiled as he watched her run ahead to the weathered bench. She gently brushed away a few fallen leaves before sitting in the exact same spot where she had once waited through an endless rainy day. This time, however, she did not look down the road searching for someone. She simply looked back toward Ethan and her mother with a smile that carried complete peace. Her mother sat beside her, healthier and stronger, grateful for ordinary moments that once seemed uncertain. She reached into her purse and unfolded the faded business card Ethan had written. On that unforgettable afternoon. The ink had grown lighter with time, but the message could still be read clearly. Emma smiled when she saw it. "You kept your promise too," she said. Ethan looked at the small card before quietly answering, "I only stopped my car. Your family did the rest." Emma shook her head with the honest certainty only a child could possess. "No. You stayed." Those 2 simple words filled the silence more completely than any speech ever could. Ethan looked around at the passing buses, the laughing children walking home from school, and the strangers hurrying toward their own destinations. He wondered how many people would pass this little shelter without ever knowing that the greatest turning point in his life had happened on this ordinary patch of sidewalk. Success had once meant larger offices, longer contracts, and higher numbers on quarterly reports. Now success felt very different. It looked like a little girl laughing without fear. It sounded like a mother calling her daughter home for dinner. It felt like sitting on an old wooden bench with nowhere else he needed to be. Before leaving, Emma reached into her backpack and carefully removed the drawing she had protected all year. Beside the rainbow she had once drawn over the rainy bus stop, she added one final sentence in careful handwriting. The best journeys begin when someone chooses kindness over hurry. Ethan folded the picture and placed it inside the same inner pocket of his jacket where he had carried it since the day she first gave it to him. Some treasures were never meant to be locked inside a safe. As they walked away together, another city bus pulled quietly to the curb before continuing down its route, carrying new passengers toward places still unknown. Ethan paused for one last glance at the empty bench, grateful that on one rainy afternoon he had ignored the voice telling him to keep driving and listened instead to the quieter voice reminding him that true wealth is never measured by what we keep. It is measured by the lives we are willing to stop for, the promises we choose to honor, and the hope we leave waiting for someone else to find.